Ravi de vous retrouver.
Hello everyone, thank you and delighted to have you here for this second day of Perimat 2025. Delighted to have you here today after that great day in the outdoors in the wonderful gardens. And I can see Laurent in the first row saying it was good. Yes, it was good. So we're going to have another incredible day with very diverse topics. We'll talk about frequency jamming, sea salvage, space insurance. We'll hear about many things, discussions and interviews until tonight, and we'll start immediately with a great discussion today about the decarbonization of road cargo. With me, I have Jean-François Agénor in charge of decarbonization at GEODIS. Yes, thank you. Decarbonization of road transport. Yes, we're talking about road. We talked about mostly maritime issues yesterday, but today we're going to talk about roads. Yes, it's good because Florence Berthelot is the general manager of the National Federation of Road Transport, FNTR. You have also beside you Yves Demier, head of transport at DRET. I've written a lot of things. You are a pioneer in electric cars, electric vehicles for last mile deliveries. We'll hear more about that. And Émeric Larcher, your marketing director for key accounts at Renault Trucks, which is a subsidiary of Volvo, as the name doesn't say, and you're a specialist of lorries, trucks, and road transport. Let's start with an inventory. Of course, we all bought an overpriced electric car. We'll see what happens on the road for road haulers. Could you maybe give us an overview of cargo transport and its decarbonization? Well, I'll remind you of our motto: if you have it in your hand, it's because a truck delivered it to you. So I'd like to dispel myths in terms of decarbonization, because there's a figure going around that you keep hearing that should be qualified in a way that road transport accounts for 30% of greenhouse gas emissions in our country. But when talking about road transport, you're also talking about cars, mopeds, trailers, caravans, everything that has an engine. And if you look at the official figures from CITEPA, which is an offshoot of the Environment Ministry, heavy goods vehicles are 16.34% of greenhouse gas emissions. We agree that it's still too much. To that, you should add light commercial vehicles. But every time people hear of 30%, they think lorries account for 30% of greenhouse gas emissions. But you need to be aware of that, and be aware that given the way technology is going, but we'll talk about that with the OEMs in particular, given the increase in traffic volumes, in fact, emissions keep going down, be it greenhouse gas emissions, but also other pollutants. Huge efforts were made. So when talking about decarbonization, I'd like to remind you of the figures. There's a huge technological effort, and lorries are no longer these big noisy machines emitting noxious black fumes and all powered with diesel, but it's no longer the case. There's always a bad image associated to our lorries and our sector. Jean-François, how is that going with you concretely? Well, a very quick presentation of GEODIS. GEODIS is one of the world leaders of transports and logistics. It's a French company and a subsidiary of SNCF. We now have 50,000 people, a bit fewer than 50,000 trucks in the world, and 5 billion euros in turnover. We have tried to reduce our carbon footprint. It's very complex, and right now we are on a decarbonization path because we were able to fully total up our emissions. We have a pathway that has been approved by SBTi. That was at the beginning of the year. The ambition is to reduce our emissions by 42% by 2030 for our direct emissions, Scope 1 and 2, and 25% for indirect emissions, Scope 3, everything that is due to subcontracting. You've just received the SBTi seal of approval, an international company that approves that, an organization rather, but when did that start? The creation of the sustainability department at Geodis was at least 15 years ago, so this has been a very deep-seated undertaking. And the first snapshot that you had about your emissions, I think that was at least 10 years ago. And in the last 10 years, you set a path towards 2030. Has the decline already started? On some sectors, including road, yes. It's a bit more difficult for aviation and marine. We'll get back to that later. But the demand for transport, it's a particularly difficult to decarbonize industry. We've already started working on that, but global demand for transport has been on an upwards trend, so decarbonizing it in parallel is extremely complex. Yes, that's an issue, but we'll get there. Yves, a snapshot for your company, maybe? Well, like my colleague, I'll give you a very brief overview of Direct Transport, which you may not know about. It's a 7,000 people company created in 1947, specializing in logistics and transport, based in Orléans, south of Paris, and operating in the whole of the country, and now working for luxury and cosmetics groups. We are specialized in downtown deliveries. Well, maybe you could hook your microphone onto your collar. Maybe that would be better. Yes.
Ça marche comme ça?
Is that working that way? If you hold it like that? Yes, I don't mind. Shall I start again? Have you taken notes? I'll quiz you after that. So quickly, cosmetics and ultra luxury, we deliver to city centers, mostly Paris, but also big French cities for LVMH and other shippers. We need to decarbonize. In 2009, what? I was asking the gallery what they thought about sound quality, but otherwise I can move on to a handheld microphone. No, they're really happy. Everybody's happy in the audience. So I'll continue. 2009 for De Ré, we switched to electric. We were the first decarbonized last mile fleet in Europe with the purchase of 55,000 electric vehicles. Since then, we opted for an energy mix with various decarbonization technologies. We are 60% decarbonized. The aim is 75% in the next 3 years. We'll give you another microphone, and in the meantime, I'll ask Emmerich. Emmerich, I said that you were ahead of the pack in terms of policy. One day you decided that you needed to electrify, to switch to electric trucks almost in a forceful way. Could you tell us about this undertaking and how you put that in place? Or what we can already say is that there's the vector regulation for OEMs that will force to reduce CO2 emissions for new lorries on the road in 2025 compared to the benchmark year of 2029, and 15% will move to 40% in 2030, forcing OEMs to have nearly every third vehicle on the road, new vehicle on the road, that would be electric. Renault Trucks chose it very early on to start decarbonizing and support its clients with decarbonizing sustainable solutions, and we have the widest and most decarbonized lineup on the market, going from cargo bags to 44-ton tractors assembled in our plants in France. And this is a reality, electric lorries at Renault Trucks, because we have 1,300 HGVs operating at our clients' facilities, 30 million kilometers driven. So dry goods transport, controlled temperature transport, bin lorries and construction trucks. This is a reality that we're learning more about. And if you look at the electric fleet, of course, we're talking about small numbers. That's 2% of Renault Truck lorries. Well, electric lorries on the whole fleet, how big is that? Compared to our 2024 sales, that's 5% of sales for Renault Trucks. Yes, but I'll be mean and ask the question again. For the whole fleet, electric vehicles, How big is that? The entire fleet in France, I don't have the figure, but probably less than 1%. Yes, so growth is huge, I agree, but you need to realize that right now. I can see you nod. Florence is still very small. Yes, it's very small, although ambitions are big. Companies disclose ambitious figures in France and at the European level. People always say we need to be ambitious and set goals, but FNTR, we said, give us more reasonable goals that will exceed instead of unachievable goals. And maybe we'll realize that if we can't get that, it's because road hauliers are bad people who want to pollute. That's not the reality. Everybody's focusing on electric now. It's a great solution, especially for urban areas. But there's not just electric. Regarding your roadmap for decarbonization, our decarbonization roadmap, this is something that all industries have had to do because of the Climate and Resilience Act in France. So we've changed our goals for new registrations by 2025, 2030, and 2040. We've realized that solutions like vehicle natural gas that was highly promoted in the last few years would probably decline at the expense, well, for electric. There's still a big debate about ICE versus EV, but for very small companies, we need to go to low carbon liquid fuels. So diesel not coming from petroleum, but HVO, vegetable oils. I think the vegetable oils were no longer fashionable. No, quite the opposite. Now we have a state-of-the-art technology so that without changing the powertrain, that's why it's interesting for smaller companies. They'll buy a diesel lorry, but you can use a lower carbon energy source in it. That's a first step for smaller companies to move towards an energy transition. Now, if you want to switch directly to EVs, you need to get support from your clients because an EV truck is a lot more expensive than a diesel lorry, and that's a huge step forward in terms of money. Yes, we'll see that it's one of the main obstacles, if I understood correctly. Jean-François, maybe an update. We've got slides that I forgot about, but I think you prepared a slide about your decarbonization levers. Yes, as I said, the transport sector is particularly difficult to decarbonize. We talked a lot about the energy transition, but it's not the only lever that we've got. There are 5 levers, quite a few things that players can do. These are levers that can only be actuated jointly between clients and hauliers. And we need site cooperation between the various players. So very quickly, the first lever is to optimize routes, the paths and rounds, so that we don't transport things when it's not necessary. After 35 years in this business, I've seen quite a lot of wild things in this business. This needs to be eradicated. And also not have any empty lorries. Well, it's rather the third lever, if I recall correctly. The second lever, which is very powerful, is a modal shift. Of course, use maritime routes rather than air routes, because the carbon intensity of maritime transport is infinitely less than aviation. Switch to multimodal also by using rail in road hauling sectors, or using river and barge transports. All low carbon means of transport need to be used as much as possible in the future. The third lever is to optimize our vehicles. So we need to saturate lorries, as we call it. Every lorry needs to be optimized, or every means of transport needs to be as optimized as possible. The fourth lever, here we're talking about technology. We need to select the best equipment with the lowest emissions, with the lowest fuel consumption, whether you're talking about an aircraft, a lorry, or a boat. And also, there's something we haven't really talked about, but we need to have actions on the drivers. They have a role to play by developing improved driving behavior. You can get performance gains of 5 to 10% in terms of fuel efficiency with a driver who's motivated to have rational driving, as we call it. And last lever is about energy sources, switching from fossil fuels to low-carbon energies. For the broader public, this is what we hear the most about. Have you got any idea of the percentage of reduction that can be brought about by these various levers? We only hear about alternative energies. What potential gain is there? And for the others, Florence or someone else? That's what Jean-François said is very accurate, because out of all 5, you can cut that to 2. There's a 4th lever, which is the greening of fleets, and all that is the greening of cargo. Shortly, there are a lot of other levers, and at the national or European level, because our international organization, Viru, is saying the same thing. Greening cargo is 50%, and so modal shift, driver behavior, aerodynamics on vehicles as well, all that could contribute to 50% of decarbonization. Yves, I could see you nod. Are you able to work on all levers with your drivers? What are you doing concretely? Well, it's part of a whole, really. We need a lot of operational intelligence. We were talking about pooling and optimization. Well, I won't name any luxury brands, but they have stores on the Champs-Élysées or Boulevard Haussmann in downtown Paris. They have dedicated vehicles for safety and security reasons with guards on their vehicles, but these vehicles are half filled. And I'm being kind when I say that they're only half filled. So our job is to explain that it would be win-win, that would optimize their transport budget and reduce the number of vehicles on the road, because a lorry that doesn't pollute is the one that's not on the road. And they pollute less if they're fuller. In terms of investment, it's the easiest thing to do. And also for road haulers, they can get more capacity to grow business. So it's a win-win for everybody. We're really working a lot on these solutions. For your drivers, driving modes, is there a lot of training for road haulers? Well, we're smaller than Geodis, and so we have a training program. We've got 200 drivers, and we have a trainer. We're using various levers with companies like Aftrail to not educate our drivers, but help them optimize their driving, reduce sudden braking, also smoother acceleration to reduce fuel consumption. You can save 2 to 5%, and so we could save 3 to 4 million euros in diesel every year. When we talked about marine transport, we talked about artificial intelligence yesterday. Is that something you're working on? I think that you calculate your fuel efficiency, and maybe you can use AI to help you in that. I hadn't prepared that question. No, that's good. We're working on that. We've got an innovation department in the group, and we're working on various AI topics. So either for round optimization on the road so that we can reduce stops and empty lorries, as Jean-François said. We've got various studies underway. You were talking about maritime and river transport. Once again, I'll focus on the center of Paris. We're working with companies like Fluidis with electric barges, or others in Strasbourg working on river transport for modal shift to massify deliveries as much as we can using the Seine, or other canals in Lorraine to then deliver on the Champs-Élysées in central Paris. We're conducting studies to show to our clients that there are things to do to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and also to improve their image, which matters for them. Jean-François, with all your resources at Geodis, is that something that you're working on as well, optimization? Yes, of course, in all areas. We've got a subsidiary, SCO, supply chain optimization, that's working to collaborate with clients to see how we can have a 360-degree view of all their challenges to find optimization levers that need to be economical and economic levers in transport are often decarbonization levers. Well, it's all well and good, but there are quite a few obstacles. We talked about the price of vehicles earlier. Emmerich, you sell lorries that are a lot more expensive when they're electric. Could you explain? How do we go about it? Today, if you look at obstacles, and we could also talk about what's already been solved, but it's true that having EVs at the same price as diesel, we can't achieve that on those segments. If you take bin lorries, they're not, well, an electric lorry costs twice as much as an ICE vehicle, but the operational cost is lower. So for a bin lorry that does 60 to 80 liters per 100 kilometers, then electric wins, economically speaking. But gradually, you are reaching total costs of ownership that are very close. And for distribution, this is +10, +20% now with an electric solution compared to a combustion solution. But closer we get to 2030, the more convergence there will be. That's the first obstacle. Then the second obstacle is the recharging infrastructure. We deployed 1,300 vehicles. Now they mostly go on rounds where they're recharged at the depot. This is what we call private recharge. We help our customers with our clients with that. Public recharging is developing. We've set up a company with Traton and Daimler, two of our competitors, to deploy 1,700 recharge points in Europe by 2027. But now you can't drive Paris to Marseille in an electric lorry. Well, now we've got a client driving 700 kilometers a day, but you have to redesign routes. So yes, at some point you'll need to recharge somewhere. Yes, you can drive Paris to Marseille, but not all at one go. People keep in mind that range is an obstacle, but the range is about 300 kilometers for lorries. So you can serve quite a few rounds with that. By the end of 2020, 26, 27, that will be 500, 600 kilometers. So in terms of range, you can address wider uses. To me, range will soon be behind us as an obstacle. But yes, financing is an obstacle, and that you have to come up with financing solutions, because for a whole year, in terms of capex and cash, paying 2 or 3 times more requires more support. So that you realize buying a small lorry or a mid-sized lorry that's electric, how much are we talking about? It depends what you're talking about, but a tractor, an electric tractor, is 300,000 euros, whereas you're talking about 100 or 110,000 for a diesel one. And for a freight lorry, a tractor trailer, a distribution lorry, you're talking about a diesel one is 70 to 80,000 euros, and 2 to 3 times more for electric. Regarding obstacles, Yves, you smiled when I talked about infrastructure. What's another obstacle? Well, I smiled. I didn't want to mock anyone, but that's an obstacle, but that's also an obstacle we need to address. We were talking about range earlier, but we've got an energy mix, so we also adapt our vehicle powertrains to the types of activities. Well, for big routes, Paris to Marseille or Paris to Toulouse, we won't use electric lorries because the constraints are higher, but we'll use different types of diesel. And we can also use decarbonized energy. To me, it's rather a psychological obstacle in people's minds. So we need to think that there are energy sources available. In a couple of years, we'll be able to drive 4.5 hours with a break then. And so legally, drivers are not allowed to drive for more than 4.5 hours anyway. So they'll have to stop and then they can recharge. But to me, this is more about a psychological transformation. You need to change habits. Old-timers and newcomers will need to do things differently. And another obstacle that we talked implicitly, you talked about TCO, the total cost of ownership for electric. Well, over several years, depending on the rounds, it can be much more profitable to have electric vehicles, but we need to embark our clients on long-term contracts. That's not something that clients like for hauling. When you invest for 5, 6, 7 years, then clients need to follow you. If they want to drop you after 2 or 3 years, you can't do that. So another obstacle is to embark our clients on these longer-term solutions, and so we need financing solutions. Florence, about who's paying for decarbonization. That can be the haulier, but that can be the client as well. How do you negotiate that? Yesterday, I was at Ambition France Transport. That's a conference about the financing of infrastructure in particular. It was organized by the government, the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Transport. They are telling us that we're out of money, of public money. So you can imagine that we try to defend our side. For decarbonization, a figure coming from our roadmap of 2 years ago, the minimum overcost by 2040 for the entire sector is 53 billion euros. The low range assumption, 80 billion for the high range assumption. Who's going to pay for that? And we've realized that, in fact, hauliers cannot shoulder that responsibility on their own. Clients don't want to pay, and the government can't afford to subsidize indefinitely. Although now we have this C2E subsidy that helps us a lot buy new vehicles. It's lucky we've got that. But the problem is, if nobody wants to pay, how do we decarbonize? And so I agree with what Yves said. We need to have a partnership with our clients. It's not so much part of the French culture, but we saw that for modal shift now, road hauliers that decide to switch some of their cargo either to rivers or rail need to do that in partnership with clients, because that assumes that there will be an extra cost, a difference in organization, and maybe expectations need to be revised in terms of demands or delivery times without the quality of transport being challenged. That takes time. There's a lot of client education to be done. In France, they consider that transport is a commodity, and they want it greener and less expensive, but that's not possible. Well, it's now a given that you get free delivery on everything. Well, yes, they'll need to adapt their ambitions. Jean-François, one last difficulty that we talked about when we were preparing that. I would like to turn the lights back on in the room, because on top of that, you can't get insurance. Well, it's not always easy. I can see my manager here. It's true. We all need to be aware that electrifying the HGV fleets is going to happen. There's real political will behind it. There are regulations behind it. And that's particularly important to do without fossil fuels. Electric vehicles or electric powertrains consume 3 times less energy in terms of kilowatt hours than combustion engines. They're afraid that they'll blow up? I don't know. But anyway, there's a lot of joint work to be done at every level because of the increase in the price of lorries, which is an issue, of facilities as well. Hauliers don't have a lot of installed electric power on their facilities at Geodis. We've calculated we have sites where the energy power needs that we use from the energy distributor will increase 10, 12, 15-fold, and so we'll need to install that electrical power. We'll need to have recharge stations in our depots so that we can run our facilities and operate. So you will need to insure them. This is almost the end. If there's one message to take away from this roundtable, Emmerich? Oh, ladies first. Okay. What can I say? Well, the perception of this essential activity of road hauling needs to change. A big country is a country with a lot of transport, and so road hauling is now the majority. I haven't given figures yet. 89% of cargo transported in our country is transported on the road, 9% with rail, and 2% roughly on rivers. The ambition is to double the share of rail and double the share of rivers. And we are ready for that. A lot of road hauliers are ready for modal shift. But even if we double the share of rail and rivers, we'll still have over 75% for road. We're not the problem, we're the solution. A last word, Emmerich? Yes, coming back to what Yves was saying. We've looked a lot at the electrification of lorries, but that's just the tip of the iceberg. It's a human transformation mostly. Only at Renault Trucks, we've got 30 people in Lyon waking up every morning and thinking about electric mobility. We've got alternative mobility managers helping clients make their fleets greener, make the switch to electric or switch to biofuels. We also talked about alternative energy. They also look at the infrastructure, about the capacity of sites to receive all that power. We've got charging experts, we've got project managers giving support between sales and implementation of solutions. We've got heads of operational efficiency for vehicles, because when you have such expensive vehicles, you need to make sure that they drive and drive well. We haven't talked about drivers, but that's the easy part. A driver stepping into an electric vehicle, they don't want to leave it. It's smoother, it's more comfortable, it's more silent, and in a way that gives a better image to truck drivers. But you need to also help operational managers and maintenance managers, and we also train our clients, marketing people, so that they can sell electric solutions. It's part of a whole ecosystem that shouldn't be neglected. Don't neglect that part of the transformation, the human side. There's a real cultural obstacle, isn't there? But as for every transformation, it's always comfortable. I think that we're going through the second revolution. The first one is when we went from horses to lorries. That was a revolution. A horse is a lot more convenient. Was a lot more convenient back then than lorries, but now it's complicated. We need to revise our transport plans and our business methods. But at Renault Trucks, we were the first. We now have 1,300 vehicles operating on our customers' networks. We learn a lot from our clients, and we are embarked on this transformation.
What's your message? Well, it's the one message one lesson from all this is that a handheld microphone is better than a pin microphone. But apart from this joke, you have to recognize that the whole transport industry is not very profitable. The profit margins are very low, and a number of companies have been going bust or they've been bought back by others. But whether we are service providers or users, we have to make it clear to our customers and our authorities that well, change is happening now, and we instead of looking at other players as competitors, they should be partners. Simply because this business is complex. There is a price race, and I can see this with the luxury companies that themselves are facing this issue. And for them, they are putting brakes on the decarbonization because that's not their number one priority. They will have to cut costs, and decarbonization comes at a cost. So what, at the end of the day, it will be for the customer to design tomorrow's transportation system. Jean-François, what are you going to say? Well, very much like Emmerich said, this is something of a revolution that will require collaboration. We have customers that are global leaders, and we can see that the SBTi trajectory does carry some weight in decisions. We have now 5-year contracts. I mean, that's unheard of. It used to be maximum 2 years contracts. Now we have 5 years contracts appearing. There's a new deal. And then if you can come up with a decarbonized truck solution, this is something that customers may be prepared to pay. But I mean, they also have their own decarbonization expenses. So that doesn't come free. It does come at a cost. Anyway, if we want to go down that road, we'll have to work together. I'm still optimistic. I'm still positive. I do think we will make it, but it will mean that it will have to be cooperation throughout the value chain. Now, since the beginning of the year, we said, well, sustainability is behind us, CSRD and such like is going down the drain. Is that happening, or are customers still sticking to it? No, we find that people are still committed to this. About the luxury industry, yes, well, as I said that they put the brakes on. Why? Because of the crisis, or because it's a trendy thing to say? No, they are facing an actual crisis, and now their priority is to remain profitable. And so this is just a cost center for them, and we are suppliers that cost them too much, and so they are putting aside decarbonization project. Instead of happening now, it will happen, say, 2 years, next year or something. Emric, do you see orders rolling back or something? No, that's a fair description of the situation. The economic conditions are such that there's, as I said, a price race and a price war even. People are looking at the very short term, but I'm sure that over the longer term and eventually, those companies that already are thinking of tomorrow, those companies that are already working on decarbonization, are those that will carry the day eventually. So this is something we have to keep in mind. And we're fortunate enough, I mean, since 2024, we've been working with a number of pioneers on decarbonization. We have clear roadmaps, and we're forging ahead. We're forging ahead. Well, I'm glad to close this conversation on this positive note. Thank you to all four of you. And in 3 minutes, Sabine de Rosière will be back, and we'll be talking about the issue of theft of road cargo, and how do people break into trucks and such like.